Hello and welcome to our 7th episode of London Cycle Link's webcast, Cycling into the Future. Today we're talking about an important topic about active school travel, and we have some great guests here with you and share their experience and insight and research with you. I'm joined, or I guess I should introduce myself again. My name is Daniel Hall. I'm the Executive Director of London Cycle Link, and we help more Londoners ride more often. I'm joined by my co-host, Luis Patricio. Luis, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, Dan. My name is Luis. I'm the board chair with London Cycle Link, and I just want to give our usual quick announcements before we jump into the webcast. And this is a very exciting one. So we keep our COVID resource page on our website. If you want to check that out, here's the link. We also we wrote and sent our open letter to council. Thanks, Dan. And if you want to support that letter as well, you can get more information with us. And I think this is our 7th episode, Dan. And we're keeping all of the episodes. Well, you can find them on our Facebook channel, on our YouTube page, but you can also find on our website through this link. Our family is growing, so we have Daniel as our ED, we have Wyatt as our shop manager. We just hired a bike mechanic, Lexi, just last week, and we're also hiring events coordinator. So if you're looking for a job and you want to work with bikes, here's an opportunity for you. And just give a shout to our bicycle mayor, who is organizing volunteers for food delivery by bike, and this is a joint effort with RBC and Pillar and the City of London. Some days are delivering over 100 meals on bikes, and that is great. So without further ado, I want to pass it over to Daniel so we can introduce our 2 guests today.
Great, thanks, Luis. Today, because we're talking about active school travel, we have representatives from the Thames Valley School Board and I want to first introduce Erin Mutch. She is the Learning Coordinator for Environmental Education at the Thames Valley District School Board. Thanks for joining us, Erin.
Thanks for having me here.
And I'd like to introduce Dr. Andrew Clark. He's a Senior Project Coordinator at the HEAL Lab and also the co-chair for the Active and Safe Routes Committee in London, Ontario.
Thanks for having me.
That's great. Before we dive in, we'd love to hear more about who you are and your work, and then just a personal note how COVID is affecting. And then we'll hear the same from Andrew.
Okay, so my role is Learning Coordinator for Environmental Ed at the Thames Valley District School Board. And so for part of that, I coordinate environmental events for classes and their teachers. I support teachers to embed environmental education into the curriculum and looking at the curriculum in an interdisciplinary way and how they can include environmental education across their maybe science, math, and literacy curriculum and bring those together in a project. And then I support our environmental ed centers where classes visit throughout the year. We have 3 centers in Thames Valley that we're fortunate to have staffed by 6 environmental educators full time. So classes can visit those centers for environmental programming. And then I support our Eco Schools program, which part of that actually has a section on active travel. And then for a number of years, I've been on the Active and Safe Routes to School committee and worked with Andrew there. We've done a couple neat projects together. Oh, and in terms of how it's impacting my life, normally I work at the board office and across the 7,000 square kilometers of Thames Valley District School Board, and now I'm working from home, and that's very different.
Definitely different. Thanks, Erin.
Yeah.
How about you, Andrew?
Well, I'm a Senior Project Coordinator and Research Associate at the Human Environments Analysis Laboratory at Western University. I have a PhD in geography, and I'm an expert in environmental influences on health, which includes active school travel. Among my responsibilities at the HEAL Lab, I am primarily responsible for all work we do around active and safe routes to school. Along with that, I'm also a co-chair of the St. Thomas, Elgin, London, Middlesex, Oxford Active and Safe Routes to School Steering Committee. And we work with organizations across the region, including both school boards, Southwestern Ontario Student Transportation Services, as well as the health units in Middlesex London Health Unit, Southwestern Public Health, London Child and Youth Network, and all the local municipalities in the region to really work together to encourage children to use active modes of travel to get to and from school or their bus stop. So really, it's a very diverse portfolio I have right now, but really it all is around encouraging kids to get to school actively. And how COVID is affecting our life. I have 2 kids who are 5 and 8, and meaning my wife and I are both trying to work, teach, and parent at the same time, which I'm sure as many of you are trying to do at the time right now. It's a challenge. And we're getting through it by playing in the backyard, going for bike rides, walks, and Facebook calls with family.
Thanks so much, Andrew. Those are great introductions, and we have an expert panel here to discuss the topic today. So thanks for the work that you do, and thanks for your time today. I want to start the conversation about why is it so important that we want to encourage more students to be active on their way to school. And Erin, I'd like to direct that at you. Why is it so important?
So this is something that the Active and Safe Routes to School, we've been not just in this year, but we've been supporting active travel to school for years. We know from research that this is good for students' physical well-being to be active on their way to school, but it also promotes academic achievement. And so Andrew can maybe speak more to this, but there's a lot of research to show that little bit of a brain boost in the morning on your way to school is good for learning as well. And then it's also, we know it's just good for kids to spend some time outside in nature, and that's good for their well-being as well. And then that social experience that students get taking a little bit longer maybe sometimes to get to school. For some kids it's quicker to bike or walk than take a bus, but for some it just gives them that little bit of a slower experience with a friend on the way to school maybe, and that's a nice social connection piece as well.
Very cool.
For the way home from
help
school,
set the state.
I guess, and on the way home from school, it's a way to decompress in a different way, that slower pace on the way home.
I certainly experience that on my bike rides home from work, sometimes out needing that decompression. So I'm sure that's the same for students. Andrew, to help also just frame like where we're at. I mean, obviously the pandemic has really changed things, but before the pandemic, how many kids were traveling to school in an active manner? And then I guess a follow-up question to that is, what were some of the barriers to being active, didn't choose to be active?
Yeah, well, I mean, now it's 0%, or I guess they could walk around their living room to get to school. So that's where we are now. Yeah, up the stairs and down. But right now, like before that, we have data from 36 schools we've worked in over the last 4 or 5 years with the Active and Safe Routes to School Committee. So these are schools we've worked in and we've done lots of interventions with to try to improve the numbers. But these are baseline numbers, so you can sort of see before we go in what the impacts are. And overall, only 52% of kids in the schools that we worked in use active modes of travel to get to school, to and from school, more than 50% of all of their school trips. However, that includes the bus kids. So when we focus on the kids within 1.6 kilometers of the school, which is the distance our local school boards use, we have 71% of the kids walk to school more than 50%, which is actually a pretty good number. But what I like to look at is actually, what is the difference between that and those that do it every day? And this is when the numbers go down quite a bit. And we find that only 48% of kids walk to and from school every single day. So there's a lot of room for growth in that. And I will say a lot of that 48% are older kids as well. So there's a lot of ability to potentially change behaviors of younger kids within the schools, as well as trying to get more of those trips to be active, not just half or more. So it just depends on what the denominator is on what we're looking at. So, but that's sort of where the numbers are right now. And why kids don't walk or roll to school. I mean, really it comes down to perceptions. Overall, London, Ontario, and I'm talking for children, is relatively safe. We don't have the gang issues, the crime, and a lot of the issues that big cities have, like Toronto. We also have very little motor vehicle collisions involving children on bikes or walking in London. In fact, there's so few that we really can't do much research with them. It just doesn't happen. Kids are significantly more likely to get in a collision in a car being driven by their parents. So it emphasizes the issue that the biggest thing we have to do is encouragement and education, because overall our cities are actually quite safe for active commuting. Of course, there are issues in every school neighborhood where people where parents will experience problems. Things like perceptions that cars are driving too fast, perceptions that they're not stopping at stop signs, that it's unsafe. Stranger danger is another thing that still sort of comes up as a major issue, even though the statistics show us it really isn't. So we do a lot of work through the work that we're doing with the city and other partners across the region to really try to change these perceptions through encouragement, through education, to teach kids and parents how to properly use the streets, both as drivers and as pedestrians and cyclists, but also educate the public in the wider community on what we can do. So those are really the main barriers that we see. Distance, though, is the number one more than anything else. The farther you live from school, the less likely you are to walk, regardless of age.
Yeah.
Thanks, Andrew. I'd like to make a comment, and we shared on our social media earlier today about the kids in Japan, for example, that at age of 6 they already go to school on their own, and like they take the bus and the train. It's like a 1-hour route, and that speaks to the how they call group reliance. So it's really that trust in society as a whole, and there are also schools in some Nordic countries that you see kids biking to school, also like 6-7-year-old, and in some countries it's not only discouraged for parents to drive, but it's illegal. They get a fine, and I think the UK is implementing some of those rules right now, where parents cannot drive their kids to school, and I think that speaks to the other safety component, other than just fear of theft or assault, but the traffic collisions, and I think this is an important one to address here. And even though we don't have a big problem with the other with assault or being afraid of being harassed. And we spoke to the 2 points, encouragement and education. And I'd like to ask about and I think you're referring to the 5 E's, right, of active school travel. I'd like to address also engineering and your opinion about creating safer routes to school, in the sense of not only educating kids on how to walk and bike and drive, and parents to drive, but also how to create safe and protected cycling infrastructure to allow those kids to, one, bike to school safely, and two, having the parents, being with the peace of mind and say, yes, I can send my kids to school, and I know that they will be safe, that they're not in danger of being in a traffic collision. Could you speak a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So Erin, you want to go first?
Yeah, what you were saying at the very beginning, and so less about the engineering, but more the culture in other countries about biking to school. I'm curious at how this time right now may start to shift our culture, where students, some of our students who maybe normally don't have the freedom to bike around their neighborhood and explore their neighborhood, may be doing so with their families right now, and where they wouldn't have normally had time to do so otherwise. And so I am very curious if the time that families are spending exploring their neighborhoods right now may start to afford children a little more freedom and independence in their communities, which may then impact parents' comfort with their child traveling alone at perhaps a younger age, or more frequently in the fall. And so I am hopeful that as parents are starting to bike around and travel the neighborhood with their family, with their students, that they may start to talk about the safe route, or whose door you might knock on if your bike got a flat tire, or which friend you might want to travel to school with, and start to think about those social pieces and the culture around biking to school that maybe we hadn't had time to build into our lives before. And if parents are working from home in the fall still, which some might be, there may be some more time to take that walk to school because they're not driving. If parents aren't driving to work, but students are going to school, they may have the time to walk their child to school and back again. So there may be some culture, some opportunities for culture shift happening right now.
Yeah, and the importance of that independent mobility, the ability for parents to feel comfortable allowing their kids to get out and explore their neighborhood on their own is so powerful. And it leads to so many positive outcomes for kids, both from a physical activity standpoint of being able to say, hey, on the weekend, hey, I'm going to go with my friends to the park. And the parents will feel comfortable doing that, which then leads to increases in active transportation to and from school, which is a really nice sort of correlation there that will really increase health and wellness of kids in our community. Mm-hmm. To then sort of turn it to the engineering standpoint, I will emphasize what I said at the beginning. We do not have a huge issue with engineering for children's school travel. I will emphasize that because that's where my expertise lies. We have amazing collaborations with the City of London, especially, and that extends to Middlesex County as well as St. Thomas, Elgin, and Oxford, with them supporting schools that are working on school travel planning, which is sort of the flagship program that we run, which is essentially each school that we work in gets an individualized travel plan that sort of identifies the barriers at their school and then comes up with an action plan to actually address those barriers and change behavior. And so through that process, we have amazing support from city councilors, city staff, and school board staff, and so many others that really help to try to address the barriers that are there. Schools that are part of school travel plans frequently get things like PEEP signs, and which are the numbers, the speed limit signs are on the streets, so people can see what the real speed people are driving is. Pedestrian crossovers and many other extras, I guess to say.
Wayfinding signs.
Wayfinding signs is another one. Things that that have been identified in these schools are get fixed if they're deemed necessary to fix. I think one thing that a lot of people forget is the Highway Traffic Act has very specific guidelines for engineering interventions. What amount of traffic, what speed, all those kinds of things that provide guidance for the city and municipality on what they can actually change within a school neighborhood. So a lot of the times it really is perception. The issues are there because people see them every day. That truck looks like it's going really fast every day because it's big, it's close to the sidewalk, and it looks like it's speeding. But in reality, when you put up those PEEP signs, it's only going 45 in a 50. That's not to say that our moving towards what we're doing now with the speed limits in London, dropping them to 40 across all residential areas, is really important. And I believe there was an attempt to get it down to 30 in school zones that failed, but I'm sure that's going to come up again as we move, because speeds have to decrease. But along with that is we have to think about what else are we doing associated with that. Are we narrowing the streets to make it more difficult for cars to go fast? Are we adding speed humps, which, by the way, I'm not a fan of because I don't think it actually slows traffic, as Erin can attest to in front of her house.
It doesn't.
It doesn't. But whatever we end up doing to make sure the speeds are being followed, or the automated speed detection, which is now legal in Ontario and the City of London is moving forward to actually implementing. So I think there's a lot we can do already, or that's already being done. Whether it's being done at the speed we'd really like, I'm not so sure. But we're moving in the right direction, and I think the city is making an effort to make school zones a priority, which I love to see.
And in terms of the school board working with the city, when we have a new school being built, they have to, our school board is quite expansive. So we have to consult with whatever municipality that we're building in, and then there'll be an urban design panel that meets with the school board with their plans, and they look at how the school is being connected to the community. And then, like for example, at our new Southeast school, they realigned the crosswalk so that it fits perfectly with the way the school is going to be situated. Maybe not perfectly, but what everyone agreed at this point anyway is the ideal for the crosswalk to align with the school. So those consultations are happening at the design level. We're not just being reactive, we are being proactive as well.
Very good. One of the things I think that's interesting about what you're saying, Andrew, about perception versus reality is that maybe even the infrastructure, the engineering part of it, has to actually address the perception. Like, you know what I mean? So even though the engineering might not be the issue, the reality is that there's not a whole lot of collisions or on the roads today. But maybe even like something like protected bike lanes, it's that barrier there that suddenly feels like I feel safe now, I can ride. And maybe there's things about speed that do that too, right? As we like further reduce speed with engineering measures or whatever measures, there are an increased perception of safety because the engineering or the other measures are working to reduce speeds.
Yeah, I actually there's a funny story about the whole thing around speeds, and it's interesting the perceptions people have, and I don't know how we change these perceptions, because in some neighborhoods, we were in a school a few years ago, and they have as many possible interventions as they possibly could. Once they have a three-way stop somewhere, and they're like, hey, we need a four-way stop here to make it safer. Kids can't cross here. Then you go to another intersection. It's like, oh, this is a four-way stop. We don't like it because people roll through the stop signs. There's another spot that has speed humps everywhere. And it's like, oh, people can just drive right over them because they're going too fast anyway because they have big trucks that can drive over them. So the reality is, no matter what solution we get, people are still going to perceive what they have in their head is the issue. And I'm a true believer that if it's required, then do it. But if there's not a real need from a design implementation to do this engineering change, like a speed hump costs like $5,000 to put in one of them. Like, that's a lot of money for something that literally in wealthy neighborhoods, most of these cars are so big, they don't even have to slow down. So what's the point of spending that money? It's way better to say, okay, first of all, when the street is being built, how can we make it as narrow as possible so cars have to go slow? Number one. Residential streets are too wide. How do we make them as narrow as possible so parking on both sides so that you have to go nice and slow down it? You have no choice. Number one. Number two, if we're redesigning a street because they're repaving it, what can we do to make sure it facilitates walking and cycling? And what can we do to make sure it facilitates our slow traffic? So can we then curb cutouts? The city has those temporary ones that they put in sometimes too to remind people they have to go slow. So there's lots of options there. But really, we have to think about what's the cost-benefit ratio of doing that? And if it's not worth it, then what can we do focusing on those other E's, the enforcement, the education, and the encouragement to change behavior? The funny thing of all of this is the number one culprit of issues in school zones are parents driving their kids to school. And if we're able to convince them of that and decrease the number of kids that are walking or they're being driven to school, all of a sudden that opens up so much more room for safe travel, both on and off the street.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. And I like the way that you addressed the broader issue. So there is the engineering piece around the schools, but it's also the engineering piece as we design a city as a whole. And I did my master's also, and it was more cycling to work, wasn't exactly cycling to school, but bike commuting. And we use a model of based on what is the guy's name? Brenner, his Russian-American scientist, with the system thinking. And understanding that there is an individual, a microsystem, a mesosystem, an exosystem, and a macrosystem level that those changes need to occur, and they're all interrelated. So we can think about parents driving kids to school, and then they can even be willing to bike with them, but then they have to go to work, and then his work is maybe 5, 10, 15 kilometers, and then he has to bike home and get his car. And if you don't have the whole city planned to be bike friendly, then this microcosms of the school being bike friendly might not, it will help, but it might not be that game changer if you don't have the whole city planned to be bike friendly, to have, this narrower roads and the minimum grid, as we say, the cycling infrastructure. So yeah, I think was a good point to address those the bigger issue and the broader perspective of cycling. And I think that you mentioned something, Erin, and we talked about this earlier, about linking the curricular activities to active school travel. And yeah, do you want to tell us a little bit more about this project?
So that's part of, we're trying to look at behavior change from students, and then how do we link that into the curriculum and look at it with their teacher as a class. And so 2 of the projects that we've done, one was having classes map their school community. So using Google My Maps lets you collaborate on a map, and students can add in, here's a stop sign, here's where the crossing guard is, here's where the bike rack is, here is where the pedestrian crossover is. These are 5-minute points from school, and these are 10-minute points from school, and they can add all that onto as a group to a Google My Map and then share that link with their school community. So we've done that in a couple schools, and then which is a great resource to share, like as kids are starting kindergarten. So here's the school community on a map. It's electronic, so it can be updated all the time. If there were construction, you could add that on temporarily. And then, so that's one of the projects. And so we've done that with a couple classes. And then another one is looking at air quality. And so last year we purchased some purple air sensors, and then the HEAL Lab purchased some as well. And we worked together at Sir Arthur Currie with some classes. And we had the students think through scientific design in terms of where should these air sensors go. So we explained to them what can be measured by the sensors, and then the students could identify, well, we should put one at the kiss and ride where there's a lot of parents dropping off their students. We should put one in where the buses drop students off. And the students in grade 5 could even identify, we need a control, and we need to put that at the back of the schoolyard where there are no vehicles. And so we placed them around the schoolyard, and students could also identify, we need to collect data over a few days. And then looking at the data, the students can identify from a graph clearly at 3 o'clock, there's a spike in particulate matter, and it's not the same as at 9 o'clock. And so grade 5 students could tell the story of the data that, well, in the morning, if there's drop off, it's people coming and going, but after school, parents come and wait for their students. So there may be a little bit more idling at the end of the day than earlier in the day. And so for students to be able to, that was their own little research, and then they could communicate that back to their school families and decide how they want to communicate the information. So they did videos and newsletters, and then they made signs for outside the school. So then the messaging is coming from the students' research at their local level. So it's not us saying when cars idle in parking lots, that increases air pollution. It's actually at their school. And then the students are saying, this is what happened in our school parking lot, and this is what we'd like you to do about it. And then they get to communicate those pieces back to their school community. And I believe, coming from the world of education, that is, we have to empower our students to help make the change that they would like to make in their school community.
That's really powerful. That's cool to hear about. And I think you're right. I think that if we give students the tools to encourage, whether it be their parents or the whole community, that whether it be air quality or whether it be the mapping and just getting more involved in the process themselves, I think that has huge dividends to pay. So that's cool.
And we've done some pedometer projects too. If you ever want to see a kid, spring to action immediately, I would say kindergarten to grade 7, it might stop. Kindergarten to grade 6, if you put a pedometer on a student, they cannot stop moving because it's now a challenge and there's numbers involved. And so they'll stand in spot and run and talk to you while they're running in spot. So we've done a couple things and done some math where you compare like how far have you walked now, and that's as far as this travels in a day, or starting to convert their steps into distances. And so there's a lot of curricular connections we can do through math and phys ed then with pedometers, and that is another way for them to start thinking about other ways they could get a little more activity in as well.
Very cool. I want to link a few ideas that we've kind of touched on, and looking forward to the fall, in that we've talked maybe that parents' work has changed, and so maybe there's more time, maybe they're not working, maybe their commute is just different now. We talked about them exploring their neighborhoods currently. That like we see that lots of people are on bikes and rollerblades and skateboards, and they're exploring their neighborhoods. They might be more acquainted with it. They might be more comfortable traversing it and interacting with intersections and whatnot, especially as a family. And so looking forward to the fall, we think that maybe the capacity of school buses might change. We think that even sidewalks might have some issues with physical distancing guidelines. What's your sort of, if you crystal ball, or if you can imagine how we can still encourage more kids in a time of a pandemic to take active travel to school? And I think you even mentioned, Erin, that this might even be more important if they get to school and are limited. Maybe they're limited in activity. I don't really know if that's going to be true or not, but if they are limited to a desk to keep physical distancing measures, maybe the travel, the journey to and from school becomes that much more important. So yeah, well, if you could just talk through that a bit.
We've talked about, for the fall right now, we are awaiting direction from the Ministry of Education to describe what school might look like in the fall. And we might not have a concrete answer even in June. It might be some options that are given to us. So we're starting to try to make guesses based on what we see are happening in other countries and other provinces. And so I think that's where some of your ideas on capacity on a bus might be different than it currently is, because that's what we're seeing in other provinces. And in terms of students being spaced out physically as well when they're lining up to go in, things like that, those wouldn't be shocking to see happen here as well, because we're watching them happen in other places. So that's we're just trying to think proactively in terms of how can we utilize the summer months to help families prepare and think about how they may want to travel to school, because we have these resources that we've created already. So we're just thinking this might be a time where people are kind of even more interested in the message that we already have in terms of active travel is good for kids.
Very good. Andrew, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's really it's one of the big things we've been noticing is this culture change. We're trying to change the culture of schools and what is the default? Because right now the default is driving for many families, and it's not anyone's fault. It's just what's happened over time. So I think what we have an opportunity when routines are all changed and up in the air to try to change those routines and try to have an impact on not only how kids get to school, but also how parents get to work and how people interact with the environments they live in. I think we're all seeing the value of being outdoors now, and when all is chaos in the house, and being able to get your kids outside and go for walks is really important. And I think hopefully that leads to a change of behavior and to make that culture different. I will also say we have to also acknowledge the fact that a 3-year-old walking 1.6 kilometers probably isn't feasible. So what can we do to try to bridge that gap a little? I think it might,
just right there, Andrew, one thing might be important to communicate to families is it doesn't have to be all or nothing. You don't have to bike the whole way every day, or walk the whole way every day. Going like if a parent needs to, if they're outside the zone and a parent wants to drive part way and walk part way, or walk most days or bike most days. It doesn't have to be that just because you ride the bus, sometimes you ride the bus every day.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And we were actually starting to play with something a Drive to 5 program, or we're calling it a mascot drop-off zone. So at At Sir Arthur Currie, we're calling it the Coyote drop-off zone, where parents can park about 400 meters from the school. It's at a local park and walk part of the way to school. It takes traffic away from the school. It keeps it on the main artery, and it gives kids a little bit of physical activity. If they're older and able to walk a little farther, then park at the park that's a little farther away and walk 1 kilometer to school. So I think we have to be creative on how we get this message across with the realities of life and parents and kids. And I mean, in the end, a parent might have to get to work, and how do we make sure that they still have the ability to get to work on time and take their kids to school actively? So it's just coming up with creative solutions and trying to look at lots of different ways to get that message across.
And in terms of different ages and like partnering up with other kids in the neighborhood too, especially at the elementary level. So with a younger student with an older student who's maybe next door, and families who maybe didn't quite know each other as well before this time. And I remember, Andrew, you talking in one of our meetings about one of the barriers of why parents pick up their kids after school is after school activities. And so if you're 6 and you play hockey, you're probably on the ice at 5, which means you need to be at the arena by 4:15, which means you need to be picked up from school in a lot of cases to get around. And so this fall might look different for organized sports as well, and organized activities for families. And so that might just change the way after school time goes as well.
Yeah, and I also want to bring up we're doing a bit of a pilot right now with Canadian Cancer Society for the Walking School Bus program, which was previously done by London Block Parent, and so we are testing out another model to see if we can have volunteer checked parent or police checked parents or volunteers come to do a route every day and follow kids and take kids to and from school on a daily basis, so parents are free to worry about getting to school rather than walking their kids to school if that's their concern.
Noah? Oh.
Yeah, that's great. I love that idea of culture change, and it's really tied to the experiential learning. And it's something that Erin mentioned as well. It's just that opportunity that families are now having to really just try to walk and bike in their neighborhoods. And it reminded me, I was trying to find a picture. It reminded me of an initiative, and I think it's put together by the 80 cities and with the city of Victoria. And I don't know if you have something similar, but I'd like to hear your opinion, or even if you're thinking about something like this here in London, is the School Streets initiative, that you just create that space for people to walk and bike, and even use the street not just as a place to go from point A to point B, but to actually use the street as a place, as a living room, as a place to be. And I have a picture here just to illustrate what a school street look like. So yeah, like just curious to know what you think about that kind of initiative, and if you have anything like this planned for London.
So funny enough, we actually did this in the fall in front of Sir Arthur Currie. One of the nice things we had done in our neighborhood was we got a roundabout. We have a roundabout there right beside the school, and they put pedestrian crossovers in it, which was the first one in the city of London to get pedestrian crossovers. So we had a big celebration at the beginning of the year where the police actually were able to close down the streets for the morning. Everyone was forced to go to the park and walk from the park to the school. And it was a great media event, and it got quite a bit of publicity and interviews on the radio and so forth. And so that was sort of, we have tested that out. One of the big barriers to that is sort of you have houses on the street and people have to go in, and we also have buildings that are used for multiple purposes. So we have school buildings that are used for childcare, that are used for family centers, are used for different events and different activities. And what happens is you have all these sort of things come together, and there's a huge challenge with it in logistics.
And even at Currie, it's a dead end street right now, so that made it a little bit easier to block off 6 homes for a couple hours versus it being a throughway.
Mm-hmm.
I see a lot of benefits to it, and I think it's an amazing idea. I see so many, like, it would just take one grumpy neighbor to kibosh the whole idea. I could see it being like a monthly thing. I don't know how it could be an everyday thing, I guess is the thing I would say.
And depending on the school too, it'll be school dependent.
I think we'll try and wrap up our discussion here, but we always like to end with a sort of open-ended question. And you've talked about all the benefits of could change one thing in the fall or maybe even just in the future to really encourage more people to walk and bike to school, or and can you tell us about that one thing, and then what would it look like? Like, just describe that future as more and more people are walking and biking to school. So maybe Erin, we'll start with you, and then we'll finish with Andrew.
I guess I'm just hopeful more like from now through the summer too, that more kids are spending more time outside and not stuck on screens inside. That's kind of a passion part of my role is to get kids outside and connected with nature and physically active as well. So that's my hope. And then I just think that being thoughtful about that now and through the summer will be helpful.
And Andrew, how about you?
I would love to see more kids at a younger age become more independent in experiencing their neighborhood outside, so that when it's time to go back to school and as parents start getting back to normal routine, the parents feel more comfortable allowing their children to walk and cycle to school. I think our environments, for the most part, are set up in a way that it should facilitate it. So if we can find ways to get that message across that, yes, your neighborhood is safe. Yes, there may be some barriers that we're trying to overcome. We'll work with you to try to overcome them. And then let your kids walk, let your kids ride, and let them get active so that they are able to experience the wonderful environment we live in on a daily basis.
Thanks so much for that. Thanks for your time today. We really appreciate your thoughts, your insights on this matter. We're excited about the opportunity that this pandemic provides us too, that hopefully as we go forward, as we recover and start to think differently about what a new normal looks like, that there will be more cycling, there will be more walking, there will be more experience with nature. And so I'm really hopeful for that. I know the World Health Organization has kind of declared walking and cycling as very, thumbs up activities during the pandemic. And so kind of doubling down on that effort, I think, is really important. So I appreciate your work and your time today. I wanted to show Andrew, you mentioned your Twitter handles to stay in touch with, so I'm going to display that on the screen. If you want to follow Andrew and also the Active and Safe Routes to School Committee or the HEAL, the Twitter handles are there. Any final words, Luis? Or
No, just thank you. Thank you for Andrew and Erin for sharing all of this with us and help us imagine this world where we have more people cycling and walking on a daily basis. I really think we can do that. I really think we have the knowledge, we have the technology. And now I think what this pandemic is showing, that we have the will to do things differently. And it'll be a better world for everyone. I mean, the Netherlands, the city of bikes, is not only the country of the happiest kids in the world, is also the country of the happiest drivers in the world. So a city that is good for bikes is also good for drivers. That's for sure. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much. Have a great day.
Thanks for having me.
See you next Wednesday.